Namaste, Dandava Pranam. By the instruction and grace of our spiritual master, Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Sripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj, we are here reading Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Canto 3, the Status Quo, Chapter 31, Text 13. Tastrabadha eva kwarma bir avratma Bhutendriya samayam avalambhyamayam aste vishuddham avikaram akandabodham atapyamana hridaye vashitam namami. I, the pure soul, appearing now bound by my activities, am lying in the womb of my mother by the arrangement of Maya. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him who is also here with me, but who is unaffected by changeless, who is unaffected and changeless. He is unlimited, but he is perceived in the repentant heart. To him I offer my respectful obeisances. Purport. As stated in the previous verse, the Jiva soul says, I take shelter of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, constitutionally, the Jiva soul is the subordinate servitor of the Supreme Soul, the personality of Godhead. Both the Supreme Soul and the Jiva soul are sitting in the same body, as confirmed in the Upanishads. They are sitting as friends, but one is suffering and the other is aloof from suffering. In this verse it is said, Vishuddham avikaram akanda bodham. The super soul is always sitting apart from all contamination. The living entity is contaminated and suffering because he has a material body. But that does not mean that because the Lord is also with him, that he also has a material body. The Lord is avikaram, changeless. He is always the same, supreme. But unfortunately, the Mayavadi philosophers, because of their impure hearts, cannot understand that the Supreme Soul, the Super Soul, is different from the individual soul. It is said here, Atapyamana hridaye vashitam. He is in the heart of every living entity, but he can be realized only by a soul who is repentant. The individual soul becomes repentant that he forgot his constitutional position, wanted to become one with the Supreme Soul, and tried his best to lord it over material nature. He has been baffled, and therefore he is repentant. At that time, Super Soul, or the relationship between the Super Soul and the individual soul, is realized. As it is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, after many, many births, the knowledge comes to the conditioned soul that Vasudeva is great. He is the master and he is the Lord. The individual soul is the servant, and therefore he surrenders unto him. At that time, he becomes a Mahatma, great soul. Therefore, a fortunate living being who comes to this understanding, even within the womb of his mother, has his liberation assured. Text 14. Yapancha bhuta rachite rahita sarire chano yatandriya gunarta chidatmokoham inavikunta mahimanam vrisham inam vande param prakriti purushayo pumamsham. I am separated from the Supreme Lord because of my being in this material body, which is made of 5 elements. And therefore my qualities and senses are being misused, although I am essentially spiritual. Because the Supreme Personality of Godhead is transcendental to material nature and the living entities, because he is devoid of such a material body, and because he is always glorious in his spiritual qualities, I offer my obeisances unto him. Purport. The difference between the living entity and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is that the living entity is prone to be subjected to material nature, whereas the Supreme Godhead is always transcendental to material nature, as well as to living entities. When the living entity is put into material nature, then his senses and qualities are polluted or designated. There is no possibility for the Supreme Lord to become embodied by material qualities or material senses, for he is above the influence of material nature and cannot possibly be put in the darkness of ignorance like the living entities. Because of his full knowledge, he is never subjected to the influence of material nature. Material nature is always under his control, and it is therefore not possible that material nature can control the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Since the identity of the living entity is very minute, he is prone to be subjected to material nature. But when he is freed from this material body, which is false, he attains the same spiritual nature as the Supreme Lord. At that time, there is no qualitative difference between him and the Supreme Lord, but because he is not so quantitatively powerful as to never be put under the influence of material nature, he is quantitatively different from the Lord. The entire process of devotional service is to purify oneself of this contamination of material nature and put oneself on the spiritual platform where he is qualitatively one with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the Vedas, it is said that the living entity is always free. Ashango hyayam purusha. The living entity is liberated. His material contamination is temporary, and his actual position is that he is liberated. Thus, liberation is achieved by Krishna consciousness, which begins from the point of surrender. Therefore, it is said here, I offer my respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Person. Text 15. Yanmaya yoru guna karma nimbandhan ismin samsari ke pati charam tad abhishramena nashta smrti punarayam pravanita lokam yutyakaya mahadanugraham antarena. The human soul further prays. The living entity is put under the influence of material nature and continues a hard struggle for existence on the path of repeated birth and death. This conditional life is due to his forgetfulness of his relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, without the Lord's mercy, how can he again engage in the transcendental loving service of the Lord? Purport. The Mayavadi philosophers say that simply by cultivation of knowledge by mental speculation, one can be liberated from the condition of material bondage. But here it is said that one is liberated not by knowledge, but by the mercy of the Supreme Lord. The knowledge the conditioned soul gains by mental speculation, however powerful it may be, is always too imperfect to approach the absolute truth. It is said that without the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one cannot understand him or his actual form, quality, and name. And those who are not in devotional service go on speculating for many, many thousands of years, but they are still unable to understand the nature of the absolute truth. One can be liberated in the knowledge of the absolute truth simply by the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is clearly said herein that our memory is also lost because we are now covered by his material energy. Arguments may be put forward as to why we have been put under the influence of this material energy by the supreme will of the Lord. This is explained in Bhagavad Gita, where the Lord says, I am sitting in everyone's heart, and due to me one is forgetful or one is alive in knowledge. The forgetfulness of the conditioned soul is also due to the direction of the Supreme Lord. The living entity misuses his little independence, and when he wants to lord it over material nature. This misuse of independence, which is called Maya, is always available. Otherwise, there would be no independence. Independence implies that one can use it properly or improperly. It is not static, it is dynamic. Therefore, misuse of independence is the cause of being influenced by Maya. Maya is so strong that the Lord says that it is very difficult to surmount her influence. But one who can do so very easily if he surrenders unto me, mam eva ye prapadyante. Anyone who surrenders unto him can overcome the influence of the stringent laws of material nature. It is clearly said here that a living entity is put under the influence of Maya by his will, and if anyone wants to get out of this entanglement, this can be made possible simply by his mercy, by Krishna's mercy. The activities of the conditioned souls under the influence of material nature are explained here. Every conditioned soul is engaged in different types of work under the influence of material nature. We can see in the material world that the conditioned soul acts so powerfully that he is playing wonderfully in creating the so-called advancements of material civilization for sense gratification. But actually, his position is to know that he is an eternal servant of the Supreme Lord. When he is actually in perfect knowledge, he knows that the Lord is supreme, that the Lord is the supreme worshipful object, and that the living entity is his eternal servant. Without this knowledge, he engages in material activities. That is called ignorance. Text 16. Jnanam yad etad adharat katamasadevas trikalikam stira charisvanuvartitam sa tam jiva karma padavam anuvartamanas tapatrayopasamanaya vayam bhajema. No one other than the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as the localized Paramatma, the partial representation of the Lord, is directing all inanimate and animate objects. He is present in the three phases of time, past, present, and future. Therefore, the conditioned soul is engaged in different activities by his direction. And in order to get free from the threefold miseries of this conditional life, we have to surrender unto him only. Purport. When a conditioned soul is seriously anxious to get out of the influence of the material clutches, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is situated within him as Paramatma, gives him this knowledge: surrender unto me. As the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita, give up all other engagements, just surrender unto me. It is to be accepted that the source of knowledge is the Supreme Person. This is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. Matasmatir jnanam apohanam cha. The Lord says, through me one gets real knowledge and memory, and one also forgets through me. To one who wants to be materially satisfied or who wants to lord it over material nature, the Lord gives them the opportunity to forget his service and engage in the so-called happiness of material activities. Similarly, when one is frustrated in lording it over material nature, and is very serious about getting out of this material entanglement, the Lord from within gives him the knowledge that he has to surrender unto him. Then there is liberation. This knowledge cannot be imparted by anyone other than the Supreme Lord or his representative. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Lord Chaitanya instructs Rupa Goswami that the living entities wander in life after life, undergoing the miserable conditions of material existence. But when one is very anxious to get free from the material entanglement, he gets enlightenment through a spiritual master and Krishna. This means that Krishna, as the supersoul, is seated within the heart of the living entity. And when the living entity is serious, the Lord directs him to take shelter of his representative, the bona fide spiritual master. Directed from within and guided externally by the spiritual master, one attains the path of Krishna consciousness, which is the way out of the material clutches. Therefore, there is no possibility of one's being situated in his own position unless he is blessed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Unless he is enlightened with the supreme knowledge, one has to undergo the severe penalties of the hard struggle for existence in the material nature. The spiritual master is therefore the mercy manifestation of the Supreme Person. The conditioned soul has to take direct instruction from the spiritual master, and thus he gradually becomes enlightened to the path of Krishna consciousness. The seed of Krishna consciousness is sown within the heart of the conditioned soul, and when one hears instruction from the spiritual master, the seed fructifies and one's life is blessed. And thus ends our reading for today. We'll continue from text 17 on Wednesday. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Sripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj Ki Jai.
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada, Srila Guru Maharaj, Srila Gurudev, Srila Acharya Dev, Srila Shanta Maharaj Ki Jai.
Jai.
Jai Rupanuga Guru Varga Ki Jai. All
Jai.
glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the worldwide devotees, Sama Bhaktivedanta Vrinda Ki Jai.
Jai.
Jai Navadvip Dham Ki Jai, Nishringapali Dham Ki Jai, Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai, Baladev Subhadra Jagannath Ju Ki Jai, Ganga Mai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai, Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Giri Govardhan Gupta Govardhan Dham Ki Jai, Shyam Kund Radha Kund Ki Jai, Tulsi Devi Bhakti Devi Vrinda Devi Ki Jai, Jai Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Jai Harinam Sankirtan Yagya Ki Jai, Scientific Sankirtan Yagya Ki Jai, Princeton Bhaktivedanta Institute Ki Jai, Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Institute Ki Jai, Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat Ki Jai, Nitai Gaur Premanandi Hari 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 Bol,
Hari Bol.
Jai Shrimati Uma Devi Dasi Ki Jai.
Jai Gurudev. Sripad Krishna Keshav Prabhu ji ki jai.
Dhanavad Pranams Didi. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.